Wetwork Media presents Dan Lauer's Post Meridiem, an unreliable memoir of madness in Los Angeles. Part 2, Depression, Chapters 8 through 13. Nothing happens, nobody comes, nobody goes, it's awful. Samuel Beckett, waiting for Godot. I never saw Dr. Ginger again. In fact, for the 3 days I was a prisoner of the Blue Room, I never saw the same doctor twice, a constantly revolving door of unfamiliar, beleaguered faces dragging the soles of their fine leather shoes across the linoleum, solemnly, looking at me cross, asking the same questions. Well, they'd say, how are you today? Don't treat me like I'm an asshole just because I'm here, I wanted to scream at them. How am I feeling? What are you, stupid? Look at this fucking place. On the first morning, I saw Dr. Patel. He was young looking, too young. He looked younger than me. Was I dealing with a Doogie Howser or another place kid genius doctor's name here sort of situation? Don't they know how serious this is? He glanced over my chart and asked me the same questions over again. Are you delusional? Are you hearing voices? Are you suicidal? I was sitting on one of the plastic chairs and he was standing in front of me looking over my chart. There were 3 other psychiatrists on duty. They were splitting time between the half-dozen patients in the room. This little scene was repeated on every chair and bed. The doctors, who looked fried and hyper, were interrogating the patients who looked totally gone. I don't feel anything at all, I told him. Are you still thinking about suicide? No, I'm thinking about what it's like outside today. And so I was, just outside this room, which had no windows to the world, no glass to peer through, lightly or darkly. There were rolling foothills and storm clouds on the horizon. There was always a breeze. It's so beautiful. It doesn't smell like piss outside. He closed my chart and sat next to me. Do you really think you're ready to leave? He asked. I looked up at him and couldn't help but smile given his expression. You've got to be kidding me. I shrugged. I guess not. He stood again and smiled at me. I'm glad we agree. They'll be around with your meds in a bit. In a bit. Dr. Patel walked away. What measure of time does a bit constitute? Is it more or less than a while? I'd been there a while already. A while was all I could stand. I didn't want to be there for a spell or a time or a moment. I wanted to go home. I wanted a cigarette. I needed a cigarette. Other than our secondary sex characteristics, there was no way to distinguish the boys from the girls in the Blue Room. Eventually, the patients looked exactly the same. Same frazzled hair, same sunken faces, same blistered eyes, same baggy clothes billowing out with even the slightest movement. We stared blankly at one another, gawked at the television, gazed at the wall, and drooled on the floor. The only business available was killing time. Business was booming. After we all saw the doctor, things slowed down for a few hours. People who had been there for more than a day slept. People who hadn't stayed a night yet sat at attention, eyes pinned back, worrying and wondering, terrified of what the night would bring. I had my first quiet interpersonal moments and considered for a time how it is I got there, into that room. The single day previous to that moment stretched out into infinity in my mind's eye, like the distortion on a street scene through a mile-long kaleidoscope. My entire life only happened yesterday. Where is all the history? Who are my friends, my enemies? Where did I come from? My punk rock princess stirred on her bed as the payphone rang. This was the only time Mary moved. Other than those moments when someone who seemed to be her boyfriend called, she appeared to be catatonic. She'd been there for 5 days already. 5 days in that room. No exercise, no sunlight, no fresh air. She was shutting down. How much longer will she have before there's no going back? Dig. The payphone kept ringing and Mary hurried to it, the Family Guy pajama pants billowing out as she moved. They were way too big for her. There was hope on her face the whole way from her bed to the phone. Mary Punkrock answered it and frowned. Someone for Dan, she said, and let the phone drop and dangle on the short cord. Disappointment in her posture. As she walked back to her bed and thumped down, she was asleep in a few seconds. I picked up the receiver and held it to my ear. I closed my eyes tight for a long moment and sighed. Hello? Dan, it's Dad, said a voice that sounded like my own echo. It's strange these days talking to my father on the phone. I inherited his inflection, timbre, and vernacular. I laugh and yell like he does. I get angry like he does. When I call my grandmother, his mother, she often replies to my hello with, "Hi, Ed." I tell her to try again, and she laughs. I choked back some tears and said, "Hey, how are you?" "I'm okay, worried. Your mother called me." Sometime before that moment, when I was heavily drugged, I was on the phone with my mother. I had forgotten how to speak. Heavily dazed, she told me she was going to speak to my father about the situation. I tried to ask her not to, but in retrospect, I think what she heard didn't even resemble a complete English language phrase. "These people are fucking crazy," I told him, and began to cry, but tried desperately to make it sound like laughter. I didn't want to betray the genuine fear and panic I was experiencing moment to moment. "No, this is not that. This is just a little hiccup. I'll get through it. I'm sure of it. No reason we can't have a good chuckle about it in the midst." Noise that sounded like laughter came from my father's end of the call. I couldn't help but wonder if he was stifling tears as well. I doubt it, but regardless, it was a bizarre moment I'll likely never fully recover from. "Well, this'll be a good script one day." Staying positive. Someone must have primed him before the call. Only speak in positive terms. I nodded. I knew he couldn't see me, but I was sure if I talked, I'd begin to cry in long, shivering waves. My jaw was quivering uncontrollably. There was a long moment of silence. I was staring at a framed disclaimer next to the phone outlining all my rights as a patient. Patient's Bill of Rights, it read. It was impossible to make out any of the words. They were dancing again. "Dan, are you still there?" "Sure." Dan flew over the cuckoo's nest. He laughed again. "Well, look, don't sweat any of this. It's just like you got cancer, you're diabetic, you just need to get better. We'll take care of it, okay? Glad you're there." I didn't know what to say. I nodded again. Again, sure he couldn't see me. "Okay?" "Mm-hmm," I mumbled. "All right, bud, talk to you soon. Okay." I heard the line go dead on his end and hung up the receiver slowly, aware that quick movements were going to be tricky, then cautiously walked the 10 paces to the bathroom and closed the door behind me. There was no lock. I turned the water on and slumped over the toilet, bracing myself on the tank. How many crazy people had shit on that toilet? How many women refused to wear tampons and bled all over the floor tile? How many times had someone tried desperately to open a vein with one of the plastic forks they gave us to eat food? The room didn't sting my nostrils with the smell of bleach. They didn't clean often or diligently enough in there. Infection was crawling all around me, starting at my feet and careening toward my mouth. Why did my father have to know where I was? I began to vomit. Hard, awful. The eggs and bacon and grits and orange juice, they all came up and splashed all over the porcelain, the floor, and my bare legs. It tasted like acid on my tongue. My head burned. I finished retching and stepped to the sink to wash my face. There was no glass in the mirror. It was a highly polished chrome material. No glass, no glass. I couldn't break the mirror and cut my wrists. I nodded. Big gesture. I understood everything. The moment was so catalyzing and cutting that it felt as though I'd never come to another realization before. Clarity fired across all my synapses. It was all clear. That was the moment I wanted to die the most. Oh, right. This is where I am. I started to sob and slid to the floor as my knees gave out, slow motion. As I looked up at the fluorescent torture lights, my face was flooded with literal and figurative harshness, and my hands began to shake. This is never going to stop. I'll never be okay again. Never wake up in a good mood. Never smile. Never love. I am damned. I'm damned. Dig? I hadn't felt hungry in something like 12 hours. What the fuck is food anyway? My stomach kept cramping and I kept throwing up. But I had to eat, or I wasn't getting better. Suicidal people don't want to eat. Sane people get hungry every 4 hours. The body demands it. Otherwise, I'll die. A few hours ago, the stripper teacher was evacuated to a private inpatient facility somewhere in Malibu. She has money or great insurance. Julie smiled, wide relief all over her face, as two paramedics loaded her onto a gurney and tied down her extremities. She looked at me and frowned. "Good luck," she told me. I didn't respond. I looked away. Her luck would do me no good. Lunch was something mysterious and awful. I tried to eat it. I could not. Because Julie was gone, I had a bed. I was next in line. Behind me in line was a 20-something homeless man named Jamie. I was afraid of Jamie. Jamie was a schizophrenic and believed he was God. He was also under the impression that he was carrying a crystal around his neck on a thick chain that was once his dead wife, that he can heal the sick, can knock down walls with his mind, is always talking to angels and not people. We are all angels, but not the good, loving, benevolent kind. This place is one more stop in his war through hell. He quotes Milton, though I suspect he only knows the verse because he's seen the film Seven. "Long is the way and hard that out of hell leads up to light." And he began to laugh so hard he coughed and sputtered and spit a large hunk of phlegm onto the floor beneath him that landed with a clearly audible thud. "Long is the way and hard that out of hell leads up to light." I know this quote too. I've seen Seven, and I've read Paradise Lost. I like the movie more. There's no way he'd ever read the book. "What's in the fucking box?" Jamie was aggressive and belligerent. They give him a shot of Haldol after they process him, and he continues to laugh. He kept on laughing, long, excited laughs. He knew something I didn't. He was clearly the most dangerous, freakish, twisted, psychotic being I'd ever encountered in person. Up until that point, I was irritated and paranoid. With the addition of Jamie to the Blue Room, I was on serious edge. Fight or flight time. I couldn't look away from him, but feared eye contact. He laughed and laughed and laughed, and then the medication started taking effect, and he continued to laugh as he fell asleep, and just before he did, I heard him mumble, "This is really funny." Jamie was wrong. Very, very wrong. I was lying on the bed they gave me, the most uncomfortable one in California, and chewing a piece of nicotine gum. I was jonesing for a cigarette like a real junkie, and it was doing nothing positive for my mood. Even laying over the sheets, it was impossible to get comfortable, still feeling the rubber pad beneath me and sweating profusely. I couldn't stop sweating. On the bed next to me, Boris was losing his shit again. He shouted, "Mother, brother, telephone, yes?" and rattled the bars on the hospital bed he was strapped to. The orderly on duty sat across from us in one of the plastic chairs, reading the Architectural Digest I had discarded earlier, and nodded. "Yes, tomorrow." I was thinking of Joanna. She must have known by then. She must have been worried about me. This thought was clear, and despite my nagging pain and paranoia about the situation between her, John, and I still believed somewhere deep and shielded from the extraterrestrial that she fundamentally cared about me. To what extent? I refused to venture a guess. She couldn't know what the place was like. It was bad, but what was in her mind must have been worse. She was out of town, a mini vacation, and great. I freaked her out with my bullshit and ruined everything. Again, I do this perpetually. Lately, I feel like a walking tragedy for everyone around me. Toxic. Boris got angry and rattled the bed he was on with his arms gripping each handlebar. He shouted, "Mother, brother, telephone, yes!" He looked angry, vicious, violent, and confused. The orderly looked up from his magazine. "Yes, tomorrow," he said. And Boris went quiet again, looking vacant and hollow. I put my arms behind my head and looked up at the ceiling and wondered how I would explain it to Joanna. I wondered what she'd think. I remember taking walks with her, putting my arm around her, feeling content and peaceful, hoping she feels safe. I felt like I was letting her down. My thoughts kept turning to her. I could see her smile. I could see her frown. I wanted to go to the movies. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to relive meeting her the first time and then go back to that night that she and John managed to ruin everything and not leave the bar, but stay close and keep an eye. Somehow, I thought, that would fix everything. Even though my depression had been developing long before that point, changing the events of that night would have eliminated the catalyst and prevented the ET from making a smooth landing. And so if I could somehow travel back to that place in time and space and make it not so, I wouldn't have been in that room, plotting my escape, burning with a fever despite my temperature of 98.6. The juice from the nicotine gum was stinging my throat, and Boris again rattled the bed harder this time. This time he screamed, "Mother! Brother! Telephone! Yes! I turned to him and yelled back, no! They're never going to call you, ever. You're imagining things. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up! I totally lost it for a moment, but quickly recovered. Sane people don't yell like that. Sane people are quiet and calm. Be good. Be good. We're trying to get out of here, you fucking idiot. Boris turned to the sound of my voice and grinned blankly. I wanted to explain all of this, but I didn't know if I had the right words. What are the right words? What do people say, do? I felt like a cold, empty monster, a reincarnation of something nameless and ugly, ancient and malignant, a cancer. I can't relate like I should. People don't like me. I'm not worth liking. I'm not worth it at all. I'm feeling sorry for myself again. Every once in a while, I used to feel proud of myself, and now I don't, because it feels like the closer I get, the longer I'm here, the more I study, look, listen, experiment, the more it seems I find, the less I seem to know. Right then, at the lowest moment, I didn't know anything. I felt Boris staring at me and turned to him. We held eye contact for a long moment, and then right on cue, and in a painfully soft voice, he asked me, mother, brother, telephone, yes? And I sighed and shrugged, smiled back at him. Yes, I said. Tomorrow. Now I'm a liar. They wheeled in the dinner cart, barbecue chicken, corn on the cob, mashed potatoes. I couldn't bring myself to eat. I stared at the food and wondered if it was supposed to be something draconian or a lame practical joke. Let the mashed potatoes go cold. So cold. One does not readily agree to shower in a place like an open psychiatric ward, behind an unlocked door, mere feet from the people so bizarre and terrifying they were deemed unacceptable to be roaming the streets of Los Angeles. I'd spent the last 2 hours debating in my own head. Yes, no, yes, no. No one smelled pleasant there. The sweat and body odor of 100 lost wrestling matches, tears and food, failure, piss. It reeked, stung the nostrils like so many piles of pungent medical waste stacked neatly around a burning pyre, speed built out of used diapers, failure, and terror. We are this. We are that. I could certainly blend in, but I could smell myself from where I was laying, and it was becoming unpleasant. Rules were, if you shower, you needed a change of clothes. But the nurses and orderlies were preoccupied at the desk, and I was hoping that if I showered quickly, I could just put my old clothes back on. Those who did not have a change of clothes wore 2 hospital gowns, one on top of the other, frontwards and backward. I had suffered so much indignity in the previous 2 days, I felt the violent desire to spare myself one more. Just one more. I was already wearing the little slipper booties. I wanted to kick my own ass for gross insubordination. I grabbed a bar of soap and a little travel-sized bottle of shampoo from the desk in the front of the room while no one was looking. It should have been harder to swipe things in there, much harder. I would have panicked about losing my personal effects, but I had none that I wasn't wearing. I made my way to the second bathroom where the shower dwelled, and it was locked. Fuck. I felt someone looming beside me, and I looked up to find the big Hispanic orderly. I didn't remember his name. He half shook his head at me. Can I still shower? I asked. He looked me up and down. I was left very uncomfortable all of a sudden. Do you have a change of clothes? I shook my head. I need to wear my own clothes again. Keep eye contact. Show him you mean business. Give him the glare. ¿Por qué? He asked. Why he chose Spanish at that moment, I do not know, but it didn't matter. I was equally matched, and by that, I mean I understood those 2 words. Because I do. It's a thing with me, I told him. He narrowed his eyes, took a key ring from his pocket, and unlocked the bathroom door. He walked away without another glance, and I stepped inside. The room was humid and dank. I was wearing my flip-flops, and I didn't want to take them off and go barefoot in the shower. Who knows how many deranged buckets of disease have relieved themselves in that stall, so I disrobed, laid my clothes 1 layer at a time, and with a great amount of care, on the sink, and then slipped my sandals back on, taking great pains to never let my bare feet touch the tile and stepped into the shower stall, brandishing the soap bar and shampoo bottle. Inside the stall, which was only separated from the outer room by a flimsy plastic liner that ended 10 inches from the floor, I had to keep pressing a little knob under the shower head to maintain water flow. I was growing irritated, and every time I soaped up some part of myself, the water trickled to a stop, and I had to bump the knob again. It took me 15 minutes to wash my hair. I also did a once-over on my stubble, which was rapidly turning into a fairly formidable beard. I had, up to that point, usually been clean-shaven. The process was a complicated one. I was also fairly zonked on another round of Geodon and Restoril, so I was having trouble standing up straight. I finished and let the last blast of water flow over me, and I stepped out and onto a spare towel I had set on the floor. I began to put my clothes back on and felt no cleaner than I did a half hour previous. At the desk, I also grabbed a toothbrush. It was malleable and weak, and I tried, with hands that were shaking like I had shell shock or the DTs, to apply toothpaste to the bristles. As I did, the toothbrush slipped out of my palm and skittered across the bathroom floor, sliding to a casual halt just under the toilet. For some reason that I can't relate, this was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. I couldn't stop laughing. Fuck my teeth anyway, they were the least of my problems. I stepped out of the bathroom and tossed the used towels into a hazmat hamper next to the water fountain. Strange place to store hazardous materials, no? In the blue room, the lights were out and everyone else was asleep. 2 nurses and the orderly whispered to each other and got quieter as I approached my bed and lay down. Nurse number 1, I don't know. She's supposed to call. There's a party up the road. Figured I'd go on my break and get my drink on. Nurse 2, for how long? They were shuffling papers, trying to look busy doing a poor job. Nurse 1, I don't know. We get an hour. Take me 10 to get there, 10 to get back, no sweat. Orderly, what's your poison? He stood next to the 2 female nurses at the desk, hopping lightly from one foot to the other. Strange dance in the low, low light. Nurse 1, I feel like wine, something dark. For some reason, this was the end of the conversation and they went back to busy work. The room was beginning to spin a little. The delusions were dissipating. No one's out to get me. I'm just starting to see things clearly. I'm not thinking about suicide. I feel like I might be able to sleep with a quiet mind. But there's still something awful and painful inside me. I don't feel any better. The problems are not going away. I feel like something bad, something dirty, something dark. Tonight, I dream. Here I am in this hotel room with others in my party and being brutally hassled by the hotel staff about things none of us could understand. Perhaps the cleanliness of my room or lack thereof. It wasn't just any hotel room, but a large villa of sorts, and was overlooking a grand blue bay or harbor, stretching down from an alcove just outside my balcony where I could smoke, talk on the phone, and listen to the sounds of the ocean while I tried to sleep, but invariably failed, and I didn't sleep for a long, long time. Too long. Millions of guests at the hotel, but one single room number for every door. Because the geography was impossible to maintain in your head, you have to open every door to see if it's your room. And then you can only discern by the personal items spread across the bed, because otherwise they're all identical. Day after, it was time to leave the hotel, and I was late for a huge commuter tour bus with other people, dozens and dozens of faces I'd never seen before, but who all seemed to know me and wouldn't stop talking to me, eager for the history of a life that didn't truly belong to me. But I seemed to know it anyway, and did my best to answer all their questions. Maybe we were a group of perpetual tourists on the road forever, with no destination in mind, and seeing everything we could. I soon grew weary of their faces and their minds and wanted out, finally out, and to maybe come to rest for a little while, maybe shrug off my perpetual motion. After leaping from the bus, I found myself in some town reminiscent of 1950s Middle America that doesn't really exist anymore. I wandered around the Main Street drag and got lost, and I was keenly aware that I was always being followed by a man just a little younger than myself, who I felt no trust for, and kept at least a dozen paces. Then I turned around and looked at him, and I saw him talking to a police officer, And then there was gunfire, and I ran into an auto body shop where they did heavy, greased work on the mechanisms and machinery I'll never understand, and ran down a long, open, grated stairwell, and wound up on some landing and hid underneath it with someone else until the shooting stopped, and I thought it was safe enough to wake up. And then I did. I'm trying to wake up. Wake up, Dan. Open your eyes. The fishbowl staff were just doing what they could to prevent us from dying. Self-destructing. The problems, the sickness would have to be addressed later, much later. For now, we were being stabilized, then turned out to the streets as upstanding citizens who were incapable of keeping appointments or remembering schedules for medication. Dress for an interview? Is that a joke? Sleep through the night? Are you fucking nuts? They call what I have insomnia. It's just a symptom of something else. Get to the bottom of it? Right. I've been an insomniac since I was a baby. My parents had to put a mattress under my crib once I developed a little upper arm strength. One night they put me in the crib and went downstairs. Moments later they heard something small and organic strike the ceiling. They ran back to my room and saw me scuttling around the floor looking for something to play with. I had just turned 1. The mattress was placed on the floor so I wouldn't break my neck. I hated sleeping so much I would throw myself over the crib bars and onto the floor. Certain death for an infant. Even then I couldn't do the right thing, the typical thing, the human thing. I have all the symptoms, but not the disease. I never managed to get the whole human sleeping at night thing together. I worked as many night jobs as I could. I like the darkness, everyone else is asleep. I feel like I get the jump on them, that little in-between time where everyone else is sleeping, when it's dark, when it's quiet. I'm a PM guy living in an AM world. It's easier said than done, making a go of it. I write mostly at night. It's easier. Very few distractions. The night is silent and placid. People leave me alone. I smoke a lot. I love to write when it's cold. Cigarettes every 10 minutes or so, seeing the smoke and my breath mix in the frigid air. It's nice that way in California. Most nights I hit my stride around 3 in the morning. Most days end for me when the sun comes up. More cigarettes. Keep those synapses firing. A little Johnny Walker just to ease the wheels. It's as far from healthy as I could be without some sort of serious chemical dependency or a life coach. They forced the mornings on us there, early mornings before the sun was even considering creeping over the horizon. The nurse on duty rolled the vitals cart from bed to bed, same little choreography at each station. Then she made it to me. How are we today? Dripping with sarcasm. Think of honey threatening to ooze off the edge of a countertop. Fine. Oh, that's good. Temperature, blood pressure, pulse rate, all within norms. I was still living, after all. No serious physiological disorders on the chart. For all intents and purposes, I was a reasonably healthy male hominid. But I still didn't feel in touch with any of the humanity in that room. The longer I sat there with nothing to occupy my mind, the more I felt it slipping away. It was a horrible place, but all the same, I was becoming numb to it. Humans can get used to anything. Boris's screaming didn't even register anymore. It was the newbies who freaked out. Spot the fucking new guys or girls as they covered their ears. He screamed just before breakfast, then stopped when the nurse fed him his oatmeal mush and fruit. His vacant expression, the food dribbling down his chin and being wiped away by paper napkins, was at first a repugnant spectacle. But by then, it was just another minute on the clock face. No different from the one preceding or the one that was sure to follow. Nor did it rack my body with chills when they changed Boris's diaper. Couldn't have cared less. I began to fear the change rapidly coming over me. Mother, brother, telephone, yes. It was morning, and breakfast was served, and Jamie was up and around again, and the Haldol had done nothing good for his disposition. He sat as he ate and spoke angrily to no one in particular. Gotta quit taking the Lord's name in vain. He is your Lord. He is my Lord. He is our Savior. He is. Then he downed his orange juice and picked at his bacon. Keep holy the Sabbath, keep it holy, he muttered, shaking his head back and forth, a constant seesawing motion. It never stopped or rested, invisible palms on his temples moving back and forth, to and fro. I was eating, but I couldn't taste the food. I didn't look at it before I put it into my mouth. Time such as that can expose how self-reliant the body really is. Put food in mouth, don't think, chew, swallow, gag, swallow again, digest. It's a perfect system. We moved to another location to complete the process, somewhere porcelain and white and sterile, but we don't have to, biologically speaking. It was becoming my own private Lord of the Flies. I hoped that I was Ralph, but feared I was Piggy. My glasses would break at any moment. Everyone there but me seemed to be severely psychotic, and while I certainly was psychotic, it was a symptom of the depression and not straight psychosis. The only person I could even begin to relate to as I grew ever desperate for some sort of contact was Mary, my punk rock princess. She was a depressive. I could sense it on her, like pallor or a perfume. Something like gaydar for depressives. She was giving off all the signals, dropping all the hints, tapping her foot under the stall. Unfortunately, she was always asleep unless she was jogging hopefully toward the phone at the other end of the room whenever it rang. Mary never got up from her bed otherwise. How to strike up a conversation? The last few times the phone rang, it was for me, and by consequence, I've been talking nearly nonstop for the last few hours. The exact inverse of what I wanted. My mother called several times, as had my friend from Florida, Nick. It was the only one I confided in before all the shit hit the fan. Nick and his wife Janice represent both my second family and my surrogate black family since I was in my late teens. They broke me of my ugly PC white liberal guilt militant phase, which I was firmly entrenched in when I met them. Not to say they endorse racism, quite the opposite, but they will tell you flat out into your face that there is a difference between the hair of a black and a white, and that it's not prejudicial, it's just coarse, it's the truth. God forbid I ever had to wash a black woman's hair, I'd be doing it all wrong. I know this. It's the knowledge that prepared me for dealing with Tammy back in the hospital. No white guilt for me. I've done nothing wrong. In the years before I went off to college and during breaks before the move west, I'd spend equal amounts of time at Nick and Janice's house and my mother's. I met them shortly after their daughter Frances was born, and there was an instant connection between the three of us. But between Nick and I in particular, the strangest part that there was no good reason for that connection. I was a 17-year-old skinny white boy from the suburbs, and Nick was a 35-year-old black man who'd been born in Trinidad, grew up in the Bronx, attended college in Philadelphia, and had more stories to tell about the real face world we live in than I will in a lifetime. But Nick and I shared a sense of humor, a predilection for keeping the hours of insomniacs, and spent hours and hours playing video games in his office, breaking the controllers regularly in frustration, and having to make 2 a.m. runs to Walmart, tails between our legs. Long before the Blue Room, Nick and I had agreed to work the situation out without involving my mother, because he knew her reaction would be one of terror. I clearly had broken that agreement. He's irritated with me, but is also extremely frightened, which is making me uncomfortable. I'd never heard Nick frightened before. I didn't think he got frightened. "How you doing, man?" he asked me. I shrugged, even though, again, I knew he couldn't see me. "I'm okay, I guess. How are you?" "We're worried, man. Really worried. But hey, I'm glad you're a strong enough person to realize when you need help. Really glad. So you'll feel better, okay?" he said. I nodded. Again. It was just for me or others in the room. "I will." And I hung up the phone. My roommate kept calling when I was either asleep or in the bathroom. He probably thought I was avoiding his calls. Maybe I was. Maybe I was not. Maybe I was still sure, somewhere deep in my subconscious, where the psychoactive drugs had not yet penetrated, that he was just calling to let me listen to him savagely sodomizing Joanna on my air mattress, laughing madly as she moaned in excruciating pleasure somewhere far in the background. The next time the payphone rang, I was laying on my bed, staring at the wall to my left. That's it, just staring at the wall. I was making no statement on the inherent boredom of the place. Anything can become a routine. After breakfast and before the doctors made rounds, I stared at the wall. Count the cracks. It was no better or worse than anything else there. I just sat and stared, made no movement for the phone, counted the cracks in the wall. Somewhere on day 2, I made it to 2075, but have to grant that I'd probably doubled up in spots. Mary Punkrock stirred in her bed and looked at me. I was looking away, but I felt her eyes on my back burning a hole. She stood, slid to the phone, and answered it. It was her boyfriend. Finally, I felt that my moment for the interaction I felt necessary was at hand, so I stood from my bed and sat in a plastic chair halfway between the phone and her bed, pretending to read another ancient magazine and doing everything I could to avoid eavesdropping on the call. After 5 minutes, Mary wrapped up the conversation with a forced "love you too" and hung up the receiver. She began to make her way back to her bed and looked like the droopy dog cartoon character, hang dog expression, barely there eyes, walking coma. Walking Dead. How old are you? I asked. It was supposed to be non-threatening, but came off a little aggressive. She paused on her way past me. Why? She asked. Her expression didn't change. She didn't make eye contact, but kept her gaze straight ahead. I'm just curious, I told her. I was judging the look on her face, thinking how pathetic it was, forgetting that I was likely wearing the same one. 1,000-yard stare. We've all got scars now. She sat down next to me, and despite the fact that she was painfully thin, she moved slowly and deliberately the way you see a very pregnant woman try to squeeze into a movie theater chair. She groaned, her muscles ached. I could see the parts of her scalp that were strategically shaved. Punk rock is dead. Mary lives on. I'm 20. I'm 26, I said, but it meant nothing to her other than I was probably a bit more financially stable, had more education, and a bit more life experience. That was what she probably saw. I saw a little baby, a 20-year-old infant that desperately needed her mommy. I'm old enough now that I call everyone younger than me a kid. I also do that to older people. He's a good kid. You'll like him. He's 43. Why are you here? She bit her bottom lip and sighed, shrugged. I OD'd on Xannies. She might as well have said, it's a little chilly in here, no, given her inflection on the matter. Did you try to kill yourself? I shook my head. No. I was just thinking about it. How? This conversation should have been written down or recorded. Recorded would be ideal. The casual inflection of the exchange could easily have been confused with two people deciding what to have for lunch at their favorite restaurant. I'll have the usual. So will she. Mary crooked her head at me, never making eye contact. Didn't get that far, I told her. She grinned and snorted. So it wasn't that serious, she told me. She laced her fingers together, clasping her own hands. Her fingertips were blackened, tattoo of the pipe. I didn't know what to say for a moment. I cracked my neck. No, I guess it wasn't that serious. Maybe I should have felt better about it, but I didn't. That sounded like it hurt, she told me through a grimace. And in the moment when nothing seemed to be moving at full speed, I didn't know if she meant my neck or her comment, or both. Yeah, I told her. It did. There was a long moment of silence between us. We looked up at the TV. It was a mid-morning talk show displaying some full-grown man wearing a diaper and arguing with an elderly woman. The volume was very, very low, but I didn't care to hear what they were saying anyway. Are you going to kill yourself? I asked her. She sighed and shrugged. They say the third time's a charm, don't they? I nodded. Should I comfort her? Tell her she has a lot to live for? Everything? She's worth it? Would I be lying? Just another one of those people who don't get the pain? It would make me feel better, like I'd done something to help her, but it would make no difference to her at all. I don't think Mary's going to make it. That's what they say, I told her. And then, just because I couldn't help it, but if I had a nickel for every time they were wrong. Mary Punkrock sighed, went back to her bed, and laid down. She was asleep nearly instantly. I thought I had a better chance than Mary in terms of the long haul and couldn't foresee a happy, contented life in her future, full of whatever a person like her, free of the disease, would wish for. Stardom in a band, a husband and children, just a comfortable one bedroom in North Hollywood, and to be left alone. None of that appeared to be in the cards for Mary. She'd be in and out of places like the Blue Room forever, breaking her parents' hearts, having useless conversations with slightly older men who, despite being just as sick as her, somehow maintain a sort of warped paternal protection instinct, coming to the end with nothing but anger and regret, or dying younger than I am now, alone and afraid, and sure there is no other way. That's what I saw when I looked at her. But then again, I wasn't thinking clearly, was I? I wandered back to my bed as well and slumped down on the mattress. My head hurt and my eyes were sore. I felt like crying but had no tears left. The medicine was wearing off. I was starting to think again. I was starting to wonder. I was starting to analyze. For the first time since I'd been there, I made a request. I asked the duty nurse for another round of Restoril, and she happily obliged. When the cabbages were all sleeping, she probably got to play solitaire or text her boyfriend. I was the last cabbage standing. The capsules eased down my throat, and I felt them working right away. I tucked the single plastic pillow they gave me under my head and turned to face the wall. Boris began screaming, but it was just white noise from someone off in the distance. I'd grown used to it the way you'd grow used to takeoffs and landings if you grew up near an airport. When I leave here, I might have to hire someone to shout, "Mother, brother, telephone, yes," whenever I try to sleep. Everything is so black. My head, the room, whatever is left of the apocalypse outside we've all missed while we've been in the Blue Room sleeping. There is nothing here. I can't see, I can't feel. Everyone else is sleeping. Anyone who thinks suicide is the easy way out has never felt real depression. It's not being sad. It's not being down. The blues are nothing, nothing compared to this. A physical pain on par with the worst fever, worst sickness, worst disease on the planet. Depression is the plague of feeling. People who don't know me very well see a man who feels nothing at all. Cold and dismissive, my neutral face is an angry one, and I find myself constantly walking upon people who instantly ask, "What's the matter?" The matter is nothing. This is just the way my face looks. People who know me too well see a man who cares too much and shuts down because it hurts to care. Dangerous. There aren't many of the latter left anymore. All gone the way of the dodo. I've either severed ties for no good reason at all, because of a savage betrayal, or because I don't remember they exist. Fewer and fewer all the time, their ranks ever shrieking. I want to say I'm mine, but I don't want to lie right now. Then there are those who don't want to know me. They may be right. But I want to care. It's all I know. I need people. I love them. Some people are meant to make it. I don't think I'm one of them. I wasn't meant to be alive. I wasn't born. I was made out of garbage, a mistake, an error. I need to be corrected. I will correct myself. This dump stretches on forever. It's my heart, where all the hazardous material from this hospital is packed into my soul and nothing good can escape. Give me a chance to touch something beautiful, and I'll destroy it like I've destroyed my own life. I am disgusted with myself. I hate myself with the fiery passion one usually reserves for the memory of a despotic dictator after he's been violently deposed. I woke up from a nightmare. Something about a garbage dump. I felt cold and disappointed and guilty. Oh, the fucking guilt. It racked my body, and they were looking at me again. Look at them right back. Lean on them. They lay very still on their beds, pretending to sleep, but I knew they were keeping tabs on me. Judging, always judging. I was moving backward. I was not getting better. I began to shiver as Jamie talked in his sleep. Take my wife. I kill you next. I was starting to come to, but could see through unfocused vision the walls of the nightmare slowly tumbling into the distance, revealing reality. Unfortunately, reality didn't offer respite from the nightmare. I struggled to catch my breath. After a few hellish moments, I could see straight again. It was 5 a.m, a solid hour before the lights would erupt through the blue room again. It was so blue. I needed to get the fuck out of there. People die in places like the blue room. The second facility I was hospitalized for depression in wasn't as nice as the first, but was still Xanadu, if drawing a straight comparison to the blue room. I was 17. Things got to be too much, so the call was made to my psychiatrist, who called the hospital, and I told my mother, and in I went. Again, it felt like another in a long string of failures that had been piling up beyond the average angst of a 17-year-old white kid in America. The ward consisted of a dozen or so rooms, 2 beds to a room, each with a rock-hard mattress, tiny bathrooms with no water pressure, and a single painting centered on the wall between the beds at eye level. It was a seascape where a schooner was calmly rocked by passive waves on a sunny day. Same painting in every room. I was bunked with a schizophrenic man in his 60s. He wasn't violent or paranoid, at least not outwardly. He was nearly catatonic and only rose for meals. Other than that, he stayed in the room and slept. His behavior didn't frighten me, but the idea of him did. 60 years old and still bouncing around from hospital to hospital, desperately fighting an obviously losing battle that had been ongoing for at least 30 years of continuous pain and terror. I didn't want to look at him for long or learn his name for fear of falling victim to the nagging thought that in looking at him, I was looking into my own future. I assumed he was sleeping when I went out to the courtyard for a cigarette on my 3rd morning there, nothing out of the ordinary. When I came inside and began down the corridor towards our shared room, EMS was wheeling him out on a stretcher, body bag and all. It's just like you think it'll be, only colder and more mechanical, no fanfare. The machinations, simple as they are, were too much for me. It's the only time I've seen a dead body outside of a funeral parlor, a real live cadaver. We had group therapy later that day. We had to talk about death and attempt to remember the man in an effort to cope. I'd never said so much as a word to him, and neither had anyone else. We knew nothing about him, and it was a pathetic memorial filled with euphemism and platitude after platitude. The rogues gallery of depressives and psychotics and manics were all too busy with their own individual struggle to exert any real energy or emotion over the death of a relative stranger. He just checked out. So long, cruel world. His struggle was over. I had a hard time feeling sorry for him. Instead, I was gripped with a frantic desperation to leave that place before I died too, and made myself a promise to never be in that situation again. Funny. Fight to get in because you're desperate to die. Lobby to get out so you won't. The human is a bizarre animal. After I was discharged, my mother picked me up and we went to lunch. She cautiously asked me about my time inside. I didn't mention the dead man who I'd shared a room with. I never mentioned it to anyone. Leichentrager zu Wasch. Translation: corpse carriers to the guardhouse. I felt desperate to leave the blue room before Boris checked out too, because if I had to shortlist it, I felt like he was the most likely candidate. Even odds in the death pool. Well, I couldn't do another one of those. I just couldn't. I had 5 hours to kill before we saw the doctors. So that left plenty of time to rehearse, to learn to fake the behavior of a sane human being. What would they like to hear? A plan. They will want to know how I will cope. I had no fucking idea how I would cope, but they'd want to hear it anyway. Why, yes, I know exactly what I'll do. See the doctor, take the meds, work the program, kick the habit. I'm just an addict, addicted to sorrow, need to kick. Find a job, make some money, see friends, get vitamins. Vitamins are good. Adults take vitamins on a schedule. They have plans. They take classes. Every Tuesday night is jazz night. Go to jazz night. Schedules are good. I need a schedule. Doctor, I will be at the Largo every Friday night for the John Bryan Showcase. Bank on it. I'll see you there. Only $15 a head. Very reasonable. I'll start writing again. Stop sleeping all the time. Get out and look at the mountains. People forget L.A. is a mountain town. I'll remember. I know this spot on Mulholland where you can see the whole valley. At night, it lights up in rectangular rows of streets and blocks, all laid out in a near perfect grid. Down there in the valley, it's so beautiful. I won't smoke. No fires because of me. No, no, no. About an hour ago, they had to make some adjustments to the population. This was a veritable clearinghouse for all the mentally unstable and certifiably insane. All different sanguine shades of madness. They liquidated 3 of the beds in the pink room and moved the poor fucks into the blue room, my room. One of the refugees instantly struck up a conversation with Jamie. The man looked like a reject from an early galley version print of the Hells Angels who couldn't hack it because they need people they can count on to not smear themselves in their own feces and run naked, screaming about UFOs and the reptilian conspiracy into the starry night behind the clubhouse. None of them would ever get laid. He had shaggy blonde hair done up in 2 devil pigtails, a full, gruff beard, and mad blue eyes. He was wearing the double gown ensemble I so thoroughly feared. And I feared the Hell's Angel as well. Anyone who managed to relate in any capacity to Jamie was the scariest person I'd ever encountered. Were they both to spontaneously combust and then ascend to the heavens on a silver chariot while angels sang "Get Back" in high falsetto voices, I would simply shrug and think, that's about right. Jamie was sitting by himself in one of the plastic chairs, staring at the television and laughing at nothing at all. The Hell's Angel sat next to him and they began a conversation. His opening salvo was, "The fucking cunts keep shuffling me around. Think I'm crazy, dude. Crazy. I'm not crazy. Cunts!" he shouted. Startled, I shifted my gaze to him and he made eye contact. But the fear came like a shot and I looked away immediately. The nurse and orderlies were equally startled. But the other patients seemed completely desensitized to the outburst. I both hope I will become immune as well and dread the moment when a man shouting "cunt" at the top of his lungs doesn't warrant a glance. That is the end of my world. Yeah, Jamie said, looking crestfallen. His mood shifted so often I was starting to wonder whether or not he had a central nervous system. They think I'm crazy too, but I was just minding my P's and Q's and suddenly they popped me, took my wife. Keep taking the Lord's name in vain. They give you meds? The Hell's Angel asked. Jamie narrowed his eyes and looked cross at him. Why? Who would you tell if they did? Hey, I'm on your side, brother. Jamie shrugged. I don't take sides with people I don't know. Don't need sides anyway. I've been saved. I'm a saved man. Well, good for you, man. So many goddamn fools in this world. Kids. Don't say those words, not in vain, Jamie snapped. Think they know what's going on. They have no fucking idea. Cunt kids, cunts all around. All around. The Hells Angels finished, ignoring the outburst. Are you saved? Jamie asked. The Hells Angels laced his fingers together and cracked his knuckles. He grinned. I was born saved. I hated it all so much. Something in me wanted to look, see these titans of batshit and their little battle royale of insane minutia and vicious banality, but I managed to avert my eyes. The conversation continued, and I pretended to be tired. I lay down on the bed and closed my eyes, let them see a big yawn. I could still hear everything, but it was far away and not close enough that I could reach out and touch it if I wanted to. I didn't want to. I don't. At the front of the room, near the fishbowl, stood a doctor in a white coat speaking to one of the nurses in a heavy Russian accent. I was assuming they brought him in on special order to try to make some headway with Boris. Boris had been screaming all morning, ever since breakfast. Jamie tried twice to strike up a conversation with me. He came over and sat next to me on the plastic chairs and asked, "Are you ready for the Armageddon?" I shrugged at him and said, "Probably not." He threw an epic bitch fit and freaked me out. They gave him some more meds. An hour later, Boris was still screaming, and I was doing my best to ignore it. Jamie had been walking in circles, staring at the ground, mumbling to himself the entire time. Mary was sleeping, and so was Jordan. He was supposed to get sprung today. But when it was his turn with the doctor, it didn't go so well. They're keeping him here for a month. 30 days upstairs on the 6th floor where they have an inpatient facility. Jordan is going to get treatment for his alcohol problem, whether he likes it or not. And I could tell he didn't like it. He started sweating and his hands began to vibrate. He was about to explode. He could taste beer in the air. He was so desperate. A month upstairs in that place. The 6th floor is probably a little more hospitable, but it's still that place. I was putting my game face on as Dr. Comrade did his best to reason with Boris in Russian. He was having no more luck in the mother language than any of us were in the King's English. So much for that. Jamie wandered over to me and sat again. He turned to me and smiled. It was a vacant smile. A smile someone who gets stoned gives you at a party just before they ask you a stupid question. So, bro, you ever wonder what things will be like in the year 3000? You think broads will have 3 tits or 2 cunts, do you, huh? Oh, fuck. Stop talking, you moron. Are you ready for the Armageddon? Jamie leered at me and then leaned back. I turned to him and deadpanned. It's a Brando moment. Gusto. All man. Or maybe it was a Strasbourg moment. Is there any difference? You better believe it, I told him. He narrowed his eyes at me and nodded. He stood and walked away to bother someone else. I hoped it would be Gloria. She pulled that same shit on me. I couldn't tell how many times she'd bitched to me about her swap DNA double helixes or her chipset implants. I could agree, disagree, argue, or be silent. It made no difference to Gloria. The same story would come again and again and again and again. All the time she was brushing her hair. It never looked more kempt, but always she was brushing it. With Jamie, all I had to do was be on his side. That was pretty simple. Dr. Bald, a new face to me, had managed to quiet Boris down at least a little, and then he moved to my bed to find it empty. He glanced around looking for me. I stood and hurried back to the bed. I was almost running. I couldn't miss the chance, but I slowed to a swagger. I couldn't look too excited. I couldn't look too sad, too happy, too much of anything. Even levels. That's what he'd want to see if he was going to think about letting me leave. I sat on the bed in front of him and he looked at my chart. Mr. Lauer, he asked. I nodded. How are you feeling today? Much better. I tried to sound plucky. That's the word I had in my head, plucky. What does plucky sound like? All the horrors were quiet. I'd banished them for a moment. We had an agreement, me and them. We all wanted to get the fuck out of there. I'm eager. He closed my chart and looked at me from over his glasses. My look, my father's look. This threw me off for a second. Eager? Yes, eager to get out of here, to start getting better. But, he said and opened the chart again, I thought you already felt better. Fuck. I mean, really better, I quickly recovered. I mean, not for nothing, doctor, but this isn't exactly a healthy place. I need to get back to therapy. I need to get back to my job. I need my support system. I need my friends and my family. I don't want to die anymore. I feel so much different. I can't even relate to how I was feeling when I got here. Really, it's nice just to be nominated. We'd learned that we needed him to close the chart. Please close the chart. Please close the chart. Please close the chart. You have a job? Paid fundraiser. Live alone? I have a roommate, a guy, my best friend. You drink? Take recreational drugs? I shook my head vigorously. No, sir, teetotaler. Never have been stoned. Will you commit to therapy? I nodded. Yes, sir, doctor. He closed the chart, and I actually heard a gavel ring out. We find the defendant not guilty. He is free to go. All right, champ, Dr. Bald said, and I wanted to laugh maniacally but struggled to maintain. It'll take me about half an hour to write the discharge forms. Sit tight. I nodded and he walked away, then it was quiet. I'm sure Boris was yelling, but I couldn't hear him anymore. Jamie was wandering, and Gloria was jabbering, and Jordan and Mary were sleeping, and I was sitting on the edge of the bed, bouncing my leg, and suddenly I was terrified. Was any of what I told him true? Do I want to get better? Am I going to stick with it this time? Am I going to make it? If you're enjoying Post Meridiem and just cannot get enough of a good thing, it is available for pre-order now as a beautiful ebook available from Amazon and Apple Books. The ebook version of Post Meridiem includes additional content, illustrations, and even an additional fifth part not included in the free audiobook version. Search for Post Meridiem and Dan Lauer on Amazon or Apple, or visit wetworkmedia.com/post-meridium for more information.